Today we will continue our study in the Epistle of James. This is part 5 that titled Tame the Beast for reasons that you'll understand when we read. We're going to be reading from James chapter 3 today, the first 12 verses. And I am reading from the New International Version of 1978. Not many of you should presume to be teachers, my brothers, because you know that we who teach will be judged more strictly. We all stumble in many ways. If anyone is never at fault in what he says, he is a perfect man, able to keep his whole body in check. When we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we can turn the whole animal. Or take ships an example. Although they are so large and driven by strong winds, they are steered by a very small rudder wherever the pilot wants to go. Likewise, the tongue is a small part of the body, but it makes great boasts. Consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. The tongue is also a fire, a world of evil among the parts of the body. It corrupts the whole person, sets the whole course of his life on fire, and is itself set on fire by hell. All kinds of animals, birds, reptiles, and creatures of the sea are being tamed and have been tamed by man. But no man can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil, full of deadly poison. With the tongue we praise our Lord and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in God's likeness. Out of the same mouth come praise and cursing. My brothers, this should not be. Can both fresh water and salt water flow from the same spring? My brothers, can a fig tree bear olives or a grapevine bear figs? Neither can a salt spring produce fresh water. Dear God, our Father, this is a heavy topic. I pray you would guide our minds, open our minds, and teach us what you would have us learn today about taming the beast. In Jesus' name, amen. You can read this passage in James chapter 3 on different levels. Most people who read it seem to kind of skip over verses 1 and 2 in favor of the more lurid illustrations in the later part of the passage. But these subsections, if you will, are perhaps more connected than we realize. James, I think, is suggesting that there maybe ought to be more learners and fewer teachers. He says, not many should presume to be teachers. In the King James Version, this translates as masters, which is now an anachronism that we still have in the word schoolmaster. The Greek word is dikdalaskalos, a teacher. It's also translated as master in many other places in the New Testament, in the King James. So, but it really means teachers, those who teach other people things. So, master in the King James is less appropriate in our modern English. And the word presume, that's translated in the NIV, means presumed in the same thing. In the Greek it just is become. So, presumably, nobody at all should presume to be a teacher. That's what we learn from those first 2 verses. And the reason that James gives us that no, we should not presume to be teachers is that teachers are going to be judged more strictly. So why should this be? We actually have a saying in English that those who can't do, teach. that kind of recognizes this fact. Not everybody who is a teacher ought to be a teacher. And James says this because they're going to be held to a higher standard. Consider Moses in Numbers chapter 20, verse 10. He was excluded from entering the promised land for losing his temper. Moses was the judge of Israel at that time. He was held to a higher standard. He lost his temper and failed to do what God told him to do, and so he lost his passport into the promised land. Teachers are going to be judged more strictly because of their influence on others. Jesus taught this principle. In Matthew 18, verse 6, he says, "You'd better not cause one of my little ones to sin." In Matthew 23, he says, verse 13, he says, "Woe to you, teachers of the law." And then he goes into this whole long list of things that the teachers of the law have misled the people in. And then James tells us what a perfect teacher looks like. And that is one who is never at fault in what he says. I want you to raise your hand. Do you ever say anything bad? Do you ever wish that I could erase that recording? I have been known in my lifetime, this will be a surprise to you, but I have been known in my lifetime for being a pretty quiet person who doesn't speak much. And yet in my mind, I have this whole long list of memories of things that I wish I had just kept my mouth shut in that moment and not said anything at all. So if a quiet guy like me feels that way, how much more for a gregarious person? That's a really high standard that James set. If you are a perfect teacher, that means that everything you say will be good. But, like Paul wrote about himself, not that I have attained that. We are not the perfect teachers, but we do aspire to that. Then James gives some illustrations that are kind of interesting. The first one is a horse's bit. Tina's not here, but is any other horseback riders here? There's this funny thing that they stick in the teeth of a horse and it pulls against their gums on the sides. And you can turn a 2,000-pound horse with a piece of string connected to that bit, right? And what happens if the bit gets in the teeth and the horse grabs it with his teeth? Are you able to steer the horse anymore? That's another phrase we have in English. Catch the bit in your teeth. That means that you are no longer listening to orders. And then he gives the example of a ship's rudder. The most massive supertanker or container ship is steered by a rudder that's really tiny. And throughout modern history, it's been a favorite tactic of naval battles to attack the steering mechanism on a ship. Because if you can keep the ship from steering, you can attack it a whole lot more effectively if it can't dodge. So in World War II, aircraft would sometimes attack this rudder mechanism on a ship. Then the ship is now out of control and they can sink it at their leisure. Both of these examples are things that are small compared to what they steer. But when it works, they steer it most effectively. And James says these are like the tongue. The tongue is a small part of the body, but it can do terrible, life-lasting damage. In the book Wild at Heart by John Eldredge, if I remember correctly, one of the things he mentioned is that almost every young boy receives a wound from his father, from something his father says. And it's things like, you'll never amount to anything, or you're stupid, or you're this. And the father may not even mean it, and maybe it's just a outburst of frustration, but men carry that for the rest of their lives. How many marriages are harmed by a wife who nags or complains or says cutting things about her husband? There's a proverb that Solomon wrote. It's better to live on the roof of your house by yourself than with a quarrelsome woman who says bad things. The tongue can do terrible damage. Like a spark, it can create a forest fire to demolish a forest. Then James continues with his metaphors. He says, we can tame all kinds of animals. Reptiles, birds. I had the unique experience on my birthday this year. On September 10th, I went to the Spokane Interstate Fair. And there I watched a man walking his crocodile down the sidewalk. His tame, well, it was alligator actually, not a crocodile. You can tame an alligator. You can tame a bear. Most circus bears are grizzly bears. Did you know that? We think of grizzly bears as the most ferocious and nasty bears. But circus bears almost inevitably use European brown bears because they're tameable in a way that black bears are not. But James says, you can tame an alligator or a grizzly bear, but you can't tame the tongue. And then he gives us what we call incongruities. We praise God with our tongue. And then 5 minutes later, when somebody cuts us off in traffic, we curse the man made in God's image. This is like two kinds of water coming from the same spring. I have a spring on my property in St. Mary's with a cabin, but it does not put out salt water and fresh water both. It only puts out fresh water. If you have a spring, you don't get different kinds of water on different days. It's one spring puts out one kind of water. You might have a salt spring, you might have a freshwater spring. You never have both at the same time. Or it's like two kinds of fruit. You don't find figs on a cherry tree, and you don't find apples on a grapevine. Every fruit-bearing plant produces the kind of fruit you expect. That's not to say that you can't do some grafting. My wife's grandfather had a tree that he grafted in his yard that had about 4 different kinds of apples and then a pear as well on one tree from his grafting efforts. But in the natural world, that never happens. So why is it that our tongue can do different things? Why can we be helpful one moment and hurtful the next? Jesus also taught some things about what we say. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 22, he said that when you call somebody a fool, you're in dangers of the fire of hell because you're judging them. You're judging who they are, and that's not your place to judge. Matthew chapter 12, verses 36 through 37, he said, we will be held accountable for every idle word we have spoken. That's a little daunting because now I go back to that list of things in my mind that I wish I'd never said. I'm going to be held accountable for that. And the Apostle Paul in Romans 1st chapter, verses 29 through 30, listed gossip and slander in his list of acts of total depravity. Paul called those the deadly sins. They may not be on the list of deadly sins today, but they are gossip and slander. You know, this is not a new problem. Solomon has a lot of proverbs that he wrote about what we say in the tongue. Chapter 12, verse 18, 13, verse 3. Isaiah, the prophet, said the same thing. He had a vision where he went to God's throne room and saw God, and his response was, woe is me, I am undone. I am a man of unclean lips, and I live in a people of unclean lips. We don't say what we should, and I am undone because of it in the presence of God. So if the tongue is full of poison, as James tells us, what is the antidote? You know, one strategy is to say, words are just words. You know this little ditty, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Do you really believe that? If you do, I invite you to go to New York City, to Harlem, and say certain words out loud. You will find that words can hurt you. One time at the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem, I was with Ron Hunter and a bunch of other people, and we were having a theological discussion at the Wailing Wall. That's pretty easy to do in Jerusalem anywhere, and pretty easy to do with my father-in-law. And one of us, maybe me, I can't remember who exactly it was, in our theological discussion uttered the word Yahweh, the name of God. And we got some really dirty looks from some Orthodox Jews because they consider that word too holy to be spoken out loud. So this is one strategy. The vow of silence. And then what do you do when you hit your thumb with a hammer? Then there's this strategy. This is a muffle mask that we saw in a museum. I don't remember which museum offhand. I think it was in Sweden, but it may have been elsewhere in Europe. This is what they would put on prisoners in the Middle Ages to keep them from talking. As Isaiah said when he faced God face to face, we are a people of unclean lips. Popular entertainment media has coarsened our speech in my own lifetime. Things that were never spoken when I was a kid are spoken routinely on television nowadays. And the internet has made that 1,000 times worse. Our words are impure at so many levels. Now, the problem is words are not just sounds. They're symbols. Man is sometimes described as a uniquely tool-making animal. We make tools to do things. And that's true, we are. But we're also uniquely symbol-using animal as well. And this is especially true in the Bible. In the Bible, some words are eternal. Jesus said, "Heaven and earth may pass away, but my word will never pass away." Some words are eternal. So, if our words are impure, and our words come from the heart, that means our heart's impure, right? That means, as Ezekiel said, we need a new heart. God told Ezekiel, "I'm going to put a new heart in you people, a heart of flesh instead of the heart of stone that you've had before." We need to be changed by the word. John chapter 1, the first 2 verses of the Gospel of John. "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning." I'm speaking, of course, of Jesus Christ as the Word of God. Now, tying it all together, looking back through the history of mankind, a single evil teacher with the tongue of fire from hell steers the whole congregation into destruction. The ultimate evil teacher is Satan, who led our ancestors astray in the Garden of Eden, and putting every one of us under a curse of sin and a curse of death. But I want to tell you today that a single perfect teacher who is without fault in speech can steer a whole congregation toward God. The ultimate perfect teacher is Jesus Christ, whose blood was shed for us to free us from the power of sin and to make us perfect. And we are now going to celebrate what Jesus Christ did for us on the cross to purchase our salvation.